Hey guys, Shabbat Shalom. It's Daniel Levine. This week's Parsha is an awesome Parshat Pinchas. And in this week's Parsha, I want to talk about leadership. There are numerous instances where we see leadership in this week's Parsha, starting out with, of course, Pinchas, who represents zealousness, who represents the ability to step up when no one else is stepping up. We then see Banot Tzlafchad, who see an injustice being done to their family, and they actually petition Moshe and are able to get Moshe to talk to God. And they're actually able to sort of change Moshe's mind based on their complaining. At the end of the Parsha, we talk about the Korban Tamid, which represents continuity. The Korban Tamid was a Korban that was brought twice a day in the Beit HaMikdash. But for this short Devar Torah, I want to talk about something that happens in the middle of the Parsha, where Moshe gives over the reins of leadership to Yoshua. And it shows that Yoshua will officially lead the next generation into Israel, and Yoshua is officially marked as the next generation's leader. I'm currently in Italy right now, so I don't really have any of my normal svarim. So if I quote something and it's completely off, try not to blame me. When you look throughout Tanakh, you see one generation is separated from all the other generations in terms of conformity to the Torah, in terms of peace, in terms of just a general feeling of the Jews are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And that's during the times of Yoshua. During the times of Yoshua, the Jews only have one person sins, Achan. That's a separate story. He's one person. We never see the whole generation sinning like we do in most other generations. It's, for the most part, a peaceful time. There are only a couple times when the Jews complain. One's where the Givonim. Another time is when they lose 36 men in the Battle of Ai. But for the most part, we see the Jews are very peaceful. The Jews are following the Torah, and the Jews never complain against Yoshua, which seems very interesting because all throughout the Torah, there's kind of a cycle of the Jews complaining to Moshe and back and forth, and no matter what Moshe does, it's not good enough. And somehow, when Yoshua takes over, there's no more complaining. There's no more breaking the Torah. There's no more anything else. And when Yoshua dies, and the period of Shoftim and Malachim come, the Jews, start to go through the cycle of sinning again. So there's something special in the leadership of Yoshua that we don't see with Moshe. So when we're talking about Yoshua, we should trace his character back to the very beginning. So the first real mention of Yoshua in the Torah is in the battle that the Jews have by Amalek, where we kind of have this scene where Moshe is standing on the mountain with his two hands in the air, and his arms are being helped up. And, when Moshe's hands are up, the Jews are winning, and when Moshe's hands are down, the Jews are losing. And the Mishnah says that represents when the Jews are, looking towards God, the Jews are winning, and when the Jews stop looking towards God, the Jews start to lose. But in there, we have an introduction to Yoshua, who's the general of this army. So initially we see Yoshua in the very beginning, when Moshe is kind of raised on this mountain by himself with his arms in the air, and he's representing the divine connection with God, and all the rest of the Jews are down there fighting against Amalek. Yoshua is actually the one to be leading the Jews down on the battlefield. The next few times Yoshua is mentioned in the Torah, it's actually not what you would expect. We would expect that the person that would be Moshe's top student, the leader after Moshe, we would expect him to be this sort of great individual who's, nearly flawless like Moshe, who has this amazing connection with God near the status of Moshe. But interestingly enough, the next two times, really the next three times we're introduced to Yoshua, it's actually in a somewhat negative light. First, we have the golden calf. We know when Moshe came down, the Jews got scared because Moshe came down, according to their calculation, a day late. And so the Jews build this golden calf, and Moshe comes down, and Moshe's really upset. And Yehoshua, who is kind of waiting at this midpoint between where Moshe was and the people were, Yehoshua runs to Moshe, and Yehoshua says, Moshe, there's sound of war in the camp. So we all know, really, there was no war. The Jews were just sinning. And Moshe even tells Yehoshua, no, Yehoshua, that's not a war. Yehoshua is initially wrong. Right? We see that Yehoshua is wrong by what happened with the golden calf. He thought there was a war, but there really wasn't. The next time we see Yehoshua was in a very interesting parsha in the Torah by Eldad and Medad, where Zakanim are prophesizing. They're getting nevuah, and these two guys, Eldad and Medad, sort of remain in the Shekhinah, in the presence of God, and they continue prophesying. And what their prophecy is about is actually Yehoshua taking over Moshe's leadership. This is told to Moshe. Somebody runs and tells Moshe, like Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp, and Yehoshua immediately gets up and says, this is a horrible offense to Moshe, we should punish them, that's wrong. And Moshe kind of turns to Yehoshua, and Moshe's like, no, Yehoshua, that's not really true. It's fine if they're prophesying, like, prophecy is a gift from God. Just because I'm the leader of the generation doesn't mean other people should withhold their prophecy. So we see that Yehoshua is wrong again, and Moshe has to tell him he's wrong. Then, most strikingly, by the Meraglim, we see that Moshe kind of pulls aside Yehoshua before he sends the Meraglim to Israel. And we all know the famous passage where Moshe gives Yehoshua the extra yud. And the Gemara in Sota, I think, quotes that Moshe is actually afraid to send Yehoshua into Israel with the Meraglim. He's afraid that Yehoshua is going to be influenced. Meanwhile, we have this other guy named Kalev who seemed to be able to overcome the other Meraglim by himself. And we also see, even when the spies come back, we see that Yehoshua should have spoken earlier. And while all the Meraglim were kind of bad-mouthing and saying Lashon Hara about Israel, Yehoshua was for the most part quiet. To top that all off, the Gemara has this very famous analogy where it says that Moshe is like the sun and Yehoshua is like the moon. So at first glance, that Gemara is kind of taking a knock at Yehoshua, right? We all know the sun is like a bajillion times bigger than the moon. The sun gives us all of our light. The sun is what lets us live. And the moon is just like a cool thing that we can look at night. In a sense, that Gemara seems like it could be saying that Moshe was this great figure, and, once he died and Yehoshua took over, we were just left with the moon, which is like, okay, you can kind of see by the moonlight at night, but it's kind of hard, and we really know that the moon is just a reflection of the sun, so really Yehoshua was just a reflection of Moshe's greatness, and not really Moshe's greatness. So what's happening? How did this guy Yehoshua, who every time we see him in the Torah, he's either wrong or he seems like he doesn't have the courage to stand up to other people, how does that person become one of the greatest leaders of the Jewish people? So I think that to answer our question, I think we just answered our question. The reason why Yehoshua was so great was because he was one with the people. While Moshe spent his whole life engaged in this connection with God that was so much greater than any other human being experienced, we know that Moshe even had to separate from his wife after he went up on Har Sinai. Moshe experienced a level of connection with God that nobody has and nobody ever will experience forever. And it seems like the people weren't really able to connect to Moshe at all. We have all these times where Moshe is speaking to God and God speaking to Moshe, and it seems that most of the time the people are talking to Moshe, they're actually complaining about something. We have very little normal conversation between Moshe and the people. There are some examples here and there, but for the most part it's either the people complaining and the people requesting something from Moshe. And we kind of get this picture of, just like the Battle of Amalek, just like Har Sinai, and just like a few other times in the Torah, of Moshe sort of raised on this platform way above the people, and the people can't even really approach him. And Moshe's relatively unapproachable. What makes Yehoshua such a good leader is that he was one of the people. He was wrong. He succumbed to peer pressure. He was normal. Not saying that Moshe wasn't normal, but Yehoshua was literally an average person who understood why the people were scared. It seems that throughout the Torah, the people are all complaining. And we always read all these stories of the Torah, like the people are complaining about water, they're complaining about meat, they're complaining about being attacked in the desert. And it seems like Moshe doesn't understand the people at all. The Torah keeps saying that Moshe falls on his face, as if Moshe has no idea why the Jews are complaining. For a person like Moshe, who has such a strong connection with God, it doesn't make sense that the people are scared. Because Moshe knows that God will provide water, he'll provide shelter, he'll provide protection. And so the people keep complaining, and Moshe doesn't really know how to react. Yehoshua, on the other hand, seems like he is the type of leader that understands the people's fear. Although Yehoshua had obviously a very strong connection with God, Yehoshua understood the people's fear better than everyone else. And that's evident from the 7th parak of Yehoshua, where right after the Jews suffered their only casualty during the time of Yehoshua, where 36 men were killed in the Battle of Ai, Yehoshua is talking to God. I'm paraphrasing here because I don't have any sources. Yehoshua basically says to God, God, you led us across the river, you led us into Israel, and now you're going to let your nation be killed? So if we look back in the Torah, when Yehoshua is talking to God, Yehoshua sounds a lot like either the Meraglim or like the Jews complaining in the desert, where Yehoshua is showing the same fear that the people showed. We never see anything like that with Moshe. We never see Moshe turning to God and saying like, God, you let us out of Egypt, now you're going to let us starve. We never see anything like that with Moshe. But by Yehoshua, we see Yehoshua expressing the same exact fear as the people have. And the people were able to see that in Yehoshua. And they were able to see that Yehoshua isn't this man standing on top of the mountain and isn't this person that's way holier than everyone else. To be a good leader, you don't need to be that person that's raised above on a platform, way holier than everyone else, and no one can touch you, and people are afraid to approach you. To be a good leader, you have to be very approachable. You have to be personable. You don't have to be perfect. And that's why Yehoshua was such a great leader. And now when we go back to our Gemara, where Yehoshua was like the moon and Moshe is like the sun, although the sun is much more magnificent than the moon, the sun provides more warmth, the sun provides more light, there's one thing that the moon has over the sun, which is we can stare at the moon. People can look at the moon. We can see the moon. We can enjoy looking at the moon. But if you try looking at the sun, it's impossible. A person can't gaze at the sun. And we see after Moshe experienced the Shekhinah, the Torah says that his face was glowing so much so that he had to wear a veil. And that represents the sun. It represents so much holiness that normal people can't even look at it. And Moshe was on such a high level, just like the sun is so bright, that people, although they were comforted by the warmth of it, they couldn't even get close to it. They couldn't look at it. It was just this giant ball of energy that's so far away that we know nothing about. Yeshua, on the other hand, was like the moon. Although the moon is smaller, I think what the Gemara is trying to say is the moon is much more personable. We can see the moon. We can enjoy the moon. We can look at the moon for hours, and it won't hurt our eyes. And that's who Yehoshua was. And that's the characteristics of a great leader that we see in Yehoshua. All throughout the Torah, we see Yehoshua being with the people. We see Yehoshua not afraid to make mistakes. We see Yehoshua, he's not this great person that's above everyone, but he's a great person that was with the people, that understood the people, and that's what made him such a good leader. And that's, I think, the message of this week's Parsha. So Shabbat Shalom, and please subscribe, and awesome.